Batu, Barada, Nikto. You must remember those words. Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. I've got the babelfish in my ear, and I'm ready to go, so I can understand your Anglicisms.
That's it. You can understand anything I say now. It's all going to be clear, crystal clear, and you won't even need to reference the Hitchhiker's Guide. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we did on the main feed the 2005 Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so, as a side piece, we are going back to the original television series written by, Douglas Adams predominantly. There's some additional material by John Lloyd, but written by the original author, and a 6-episode series that featured on the BBC in 1981. Although this is called The Hitchhiker's Guide, or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it covers both the first book and sort of some of the second book, which is
an abridged version of the second. Yeah.
I think this is an abridged version of most things, but we'll get to that. Yes, but the second book is called The Restaurant
at the End
of the Universe. Yes. So I'm not going to go over the plot because we talked about it in the grand thing. It's the usual thing. It's Arthur Dent saved by the planet as it's about to be destroyed by the Vogons, by Ford Prefect, and off they go. They meet Zaphod, Trillian, and they go in search of Deep Thought and the Question, so on and so forth. Go on, Julian, what are your first thoughts on 1981's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
I mean, I love this, and I find it utterly charming. You and I are both big fans of Red Dwarf, and, we see the influence here of Hitchhikers on Red Dwarf. It is very much sort of the, low budget, you see the, Doctor Who effects, but it works. And I think, much as in the movie, all the Hitchhikers elements, done in animation, imitating computers of the era, every one of those work. I do think that by the end of 6 episodes, it starts to drag, and the abridgments are begin to be disruptive, to the narrative flow. So what about you?
No, very much the same. I do enjoy this. I think there's a fun to it. I think lots of good ideas. And I do think that the characters mostly work. I'll talk about those in a minute. But I do like there are certain things that are iconic that you sort of look at this, like the music, which is used in this, is then used again in the 2005 film. But it's so simple that it becomes, it's really catchy. That I'm not going to try and do it, but the dun 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 dun, it's such a nice little sort of tune that I just think it's become synonymous with Hitchhikers. It was used for the sort of if you go onto Audible or on YouTube, you find they re-released all of they scrubbed up the tapes and did give them a bit of a clean-up, high definition clean-up in the early 2000s, just before the film came out, funny enough.
You mean of the radio?
Of the radio shows, and they inserted that music and stuff. So the music's there again, and it sort of plays, and it's fantastic. And so, but this has a feel, it does. There's a definite sort of like late 70s, early 80s Doctor Who feel to this. But again, I kind of like that, because I'm sort of going, oh yeah, I remember this. This feels good, the glare of certain costumes and there's certain things which I'm like, oh, I like that. And it's all good for the most. No, it's not all good, because I want to be serious. Like, I enjoy it, but the very thing I do find is it's both more expanded and rushed at the same time. And so you do get more of the Hitchhiker's Guide saying things. So you get to learn more about some of the characters that you don't learn in the film. But at the same time, characters are also lessened as well, that to the extent of like, it's very much, this is very much Ford and Arthur's story.
Yeah.
And in doing that, all of the characters become secondary.
Yes.
In particular, Trillian, who gets barely anything to do. And
she had little to do in the movie. We complained about how thin that character was,
and
but
she's even thinner in this. Like, it's highlighted at least there's a reference to the guide makes, or the voiceover. The fantastic Peter Jones makes his voice is fantastic in this. But she's a genius physicist. And it's like this offhand compliment. And it's like, oh, Trillian's an offhand, and this genius physicist. Off we go, and it's like, oh, hang on, no, there's, why is she so little in this then?
No, there was an earlier comment about that. I mean, there is that offhand one, but there is an earlier statement about how she's a astrophysicist and another field that's related. And so, I mean, that is canon in this show. Which is obviously not the case in the movie, but she's played as a dumb blonde. Despite that, I mean, whereas in the movie she's played as an intelligent, but average in the sense of her occupation and experience, sort of unsatisfied, woman. Here she's played as an astrophysicist, but who acts like Victoria Jackson from SNL.
Yes, well, played by Sandra Dickinson, who is a comic actress who has been in a number of sitcoms and things, and often plays the ditzy blonde. Like, that was her hook. Shtick. That was her role. Yeah, shtick as an actress. So she would do that and again and again. The other character in this that, having watched the film and then watching this, that I was like, is Zaphod Beeblebrox. So you learn a little bit more that Zaphod is the one that creates the drink, the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blast. Like, he created it, and there's an offhand comment about he's a part-time president of the galaxy. Obviously, they play that up in the film. That's part of the plot in the movie version. But what I sort of find in watching this is the film version played by Sam Rockwell.
Yeah.
He has almost like a dumb charisma. Like you'd almost like you can see why his sort of charisma and confidence, like misplaced as it is, means people will follow him. That's why he sort of seems to do things and just sort of seems to think he's in the right all the time, and like signing things, loving kisses, Zaphod, that sort of thing. Like, he's dumb but relatively well-meaning, but slightly selfish. But like, he's got a charisma that sort of works. This Zaphod is just a bit of a pillock. Like, I don't find him appealing in the same way, and I sort of I forgive the not great double head special effects. That's not a problem. But again, like in the film, that's given there's a reason for that. Here, it's just sort of like, oh, he chose to do it, and it's never really explained, and stuff. It's I don't know.
He's very undeveloped. He seems very cardboard. He's equally willing to throw other people under the bus, but he just seems like a dick now instead of just like a charming dick. Yeah,
he's not the con man that you would see.
Right.
The Sam Rockwell version being sort of like, that this version's just is just obnoxious. Well,
yeah, you're right, and I agree with all of that, and I think you don't really, you could be forgiven for not remembering that he's the president at all, because it's really just one line, whereas that's important in the film, which is a much better job with both of those characters. But also, of course, let's be honest, we miss Sam Rockwell. You say that you forgive the double head being, bad. I don't. It is one thing that irritates me, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm willing to forgive it being as, like it was animatronic and, they had a small budget and it looks bad and it gets worse as time goes on. Like it's clearly deteriorating.
It's clearly been bashed about. I love that.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, what I can't forgive is like shift the suit. So you just cut to, instead of saying like, oh, he's sleeping, right? But, it's clearly just a model head. It's like, shift the suit so the actor's head is on the other side and just do some cutting where you see the other. I've seen this in lots and I've never understood why they don't do that. Maybe that suit only goes the one way, but I mean, like, come on, it can't be that hard. Move the head to the other hole.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It does feel, yeah. Well, this is, I think, one of the things I would say is the costuming in this is also a little bit,
yeah.
Again, Arthur and Ford are fine. Like, they're focused on them. Zaphod, I know he's supposed to be like the worst dressed person in the galaxy and stuff, but he doesn't feel like the worst dress. It just sort of feels a bit like oddly eclectic. Like, what have we got in wardrobe this week? And then Trillian just wears a collection of sort of skimpy red outfits for no apparent reason. I'm just like, that really doesn't seem to make any sense. I've got no, yeah. So the costuming doesn't work for me. What I find, my favorite character in all this is the guy who plays Ford.
Yeah,
Ford Prefect I think is really good. I think he's actually the best.
Yeah.
I think the guy who plays Arthur Dent is slightly wooden at times and feels too posh. He feels too British. And I know this is supposed to be a parody and stuff, but it feels too Little England for me, being a Brit. I want someone. I feel Martin Freeman is a better average Joe kind of character than Simon Jones.
Yeah, he it's funny you say posh. I mean, I don't have the same cultural understanding that you do, and so I mean, I would say like he's so deadpan that he seems like very calm and very reserved. He doesn't need to be told stay calm because he has a stiff upper lip about everything.
Yes,
by nature, and he just seems so reserved.
Well, the thing is, I find that the one of the things I liked about the Martin Freeman version is that sort of like slightly suppressed, frustrated rage.
Yeah.
That he's constantly just sort of like, on the verge of like, his bafflement and confusion, everything is just pushing him into that rage, which I think Freeman does wonderfully. But with this version with Simon Jones as Arthur Dent, he just feels slightly sort of like annoyed or sort of like, well, I have to say that's quite that's a real inconvenience for what it was planning on doing today. Now, the Earth has been destroyed, and you seem very sort of like, well, there goes Sunday lunch, and it's like, no, it feels too downplayed, like you say, and I find that a little,
That's a good point. I mean, I think that's true in general, but it is also true that there isn't the same sort of mourning for Earth. Either on
Trillian doesn't notice
she doesn't
at all.
It's not even a plot point that she learns it like it is in the movie.
Yeah, well, there's 2 points because I wanted to raise that actually because there was 2 things. Like again, I wanted to say exactly that. She never has a point where she gets annoyed about it or is shocked by it. But even at the end of the film, and this sort of played out a little bit in the film as well, they seem to keep overplay. They keep referring to Arthur as the last of being of the Earth, and I keep going, no, you've got 2. You've got someone, you've got Joe Average, and you've got an astrophysicist. But why are you asking Arthur Dent for the question? This seems all wrong.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that is true. And it is so consciously their story, right?
Yes.
And I was thinking about, one thing that I love about both this and Red Dwarf is the setup, the sort of opening of both, in the sense that all of humanity's dead, right?
Yeah.
Like both began in this utterly absurd place that is so shocking to the mind to even contemplate. And so much of our fiction is scared to even go there at the end of a movie, right? They save the humanity to start at the end place of other movies or other shows that they don't have the guts to follow through on, and start there is so shocking and so delightful to me. But in Red Dwarf really finds its legs when when Kat and Crichton, take off and become real characters, and it becomes less the odd couple, the main two. And Hitchhikers never really gets that chance.
Yes.
And it's so clearly Ford and Arthur. And in fact, to its shame, just drops without any explanation Trillian and the president,
Zaphod.
and then Zaphod, and then kills off the robot.
Well, that's the thing again, because I want to get to what I do like, because I do want to get to some of those points you've made, because the opening, one of the things I do like about this is that it has the Adams, the Douglas Adams humor, and there's lots of sort of little digs again, and I think maybe, I don't know if I'm able to appreciate it more than yourself, because obviously it's very British, sort of like little digs. But there's definitely little things that sort of this obsession with digital watches. I love the fact that sort of like this is obviously a very 80s thing, or late 70s, early 80s, and there's lots of things where the book is able to expand upon the Hitchhiker's Guide, and I do like all that. The humor is there, and some of them are quite sort of cutting. It keeps coming back. I think there's a whole thing about sort of like later on it talks about the 3 stages of food, or the 3 stages of like
civilization.
That's it. Yes. 3 stages of how do we eat? Why do we eat? Where do we go for lunch? And I think that's
it's like survival is the first one, right, and then the third one is like sophistication.
Right. And there's lots of things like that, and it's wonderfully done. I think there's some great little moments like that. But then there's others that just feel so overplayed, where you're just like, okay, I get it. Like, this is going on a little bit much at the detriment of the story, but it's still good. It's all really good.
Give me an example.
I was thinking off the top of my head. Let me just check the episode. So, I think really that there's a bit of a recappy kind of thing. So like when you have the whole thing about disaster, what they call disaster area. The band. Yeah. Like, I get that because it's their ship that becomes important in episode 5. But it goes on so much about what it is to go to a disaster area concert that I'm like, that's 4 minutes of a 30-minute episode. That's quite a portion. So that's probably the one that stands out the most. But what I would say is the first 2 episodes of this are super strong.
Yes, I agree, and I think it gets worse as time goes on. I think those first 2 are, insanely strong. And but your disaster area is like episode 5, you know, and by then it's starting to fall apart, and 6 is just, it's falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like I say, that first 2 is obviously the Earth being destroyed, the whole stuff that we're very used to about, what would happen to this bulldozer if I let it roll over the top of you? Absolutely nothing. All the bureaucracy stuff. But I also like the fact that you learn that when they try to hitchhike and he puts out the thumb, like in the film, it's sort of like there's just some excuse as to why they ended up on the Vogon ship.
Yes.
I like the fact that the Vogons, they got on the Vogon ship, but the Vogons will never pick up hitchhikers. But their understaff, the crew that they have that are a different alien race, hate the Vogons so much that they will pick up hitchhikers just to annoy the Vogons. Like, you get that as well. I love that. I thought that was fantastic.
I do too. And it's something that's not explained adequately in the movie. No. You're left to kind of guess that some Vogon somewhere on the ship has hit a button to accept them. But it doesn't really make sense. And, this is a lot better. I agree.
And so, there's a bit, there's some other stuff. I actually still like the designs, although the Vogons are a little, the makeup's not great.
It's very Doctor Who.
It's very Doctor Who. And so I actually am quite, again, charmed by it. I do like it. I like when they first meet. I think they first get onto they first meet the Zaphod and Trillian and Marvin and all that sort of stuff. You get to learn more about the doors, about how the doors have got artificial intelligence, but they're all they're all hugely satisfied to open and close for you.
That's in the movie, but
It
just
is.
gets a little more space here.
I think it's more space, but I actually like it. I think there's I like it here, but it made me think about the film more. And I love the I went back and I didn't watch the whole film, but I wanted to check something. The noise the doors make in the film, she's like they are self-satisfied at doing a good job. It's such a nice touch. But I like it here. So I do like the expansions and stuff. And I do think those first 2 episodes, it makes me wonder, and I wanted to watch, I didn't get a chance to watch some of the behind the scenes stuff, but what I feel is there's something going on here where they're like, the first 2 episodes, like someone's come in and gone, they're not moving fast enough. Not enough is happening, speed this up sort of thing. And so he's introduced more. And unfortunately, the more he introduces, the more it feels like they go from one thing to the next, and it sort of you lose all the characters.
Yeah, well, literally,
Yes,
literally they drop characters. I mean, I would say I agree with you. I would say, a couple other things in those first 2 episodes. In episode 2, is the mostly harmless joke. I don't remember the mostly harmless joke from the movie.
It's not in the film. No, it's not in the film.
And that's such a key, as a title of a book. I mean, it's such a key joke. And it has always worked for me. This being that the Hitchhiker's entry for Earth was just harmless. And after all those years on Earth, Ford's, amendment is just to add the word mostly harmless, which also doesn't paint Earth in a better light, and Ford's like, just can't believe it. But it adds to just the cosmic insignificance of Earth. And, the other thing is the emphasis on how the Hitchhiker's Guide is inaccurate, and it's known for its inaccuracies. Oh, that's very funny. That's very good stuff. And that's not there in the movie.
No. The Hitchhiker's Guide in the film is very much played as like the definitive guide. Mm-hmm. And it plays down the intergalactic encyclopedia, whatever.
Yeah, is
sort of forgotten. In this, like, it highlights, and there's a great sketch of alcohol. It talks about alcohol, doesn't it? It talks about alcohol is this thing that will do this, this, and this, and it shows the humans, and it shows like an alien version, and how detailed the encyclopedia it is. It says the Hitchhiker's Guide of Entry Alcohol says the Pangalactic Gargle Blaster created by Zaphod Breedbox is the most. And that's it. And you're like, I say, it's inaccurate. It's a bit like Wikipedia. Like, it just has these like questionable entries. I loved all that. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. No, I do too. I really strongly like that. The other thing is that I think that this is even more atheistic and mocking God. Yes. Like in the movie, you've got the whole, you actually see the religious order that you only get here in, of the Sneeds, and it's nice to see the sort of fake cave paintings and stuff of the, that's all charming. But, it's fun to see that cult in the movie. And of course I think, no, it makes more sense than some religions do. But here there's a wonderful, and of course both versions have the sort of the books of like more of God's biggest mistakes, and, but one thing is I really love is the Babelfish bit, where here they not only explain the Babelfish and have a diagram, but then there's the fact that it's so improbably, like the idea that it's evolved through evolution to excrete the right answers, and feed on brainwaves. It's so improbable that it's been used as proof. It's seen as proof that God doesn't exist, which is of course the classic thing Adams does of just constantly invert your expectations. And the idea being that God has not left a universe in which you've got to believe on faith is the whole idea. There's not proof of God. But then people say, well, what about the Babelfish? And God's like, yeah, that you're right. That is a giveaway.
Yeah.
So given that there is a giveaway in the universe, it must mean God doesn't exist. And I just, there's something so delightful in the sort of
Well,
like
I love the
John
fact,
Donne-esque in the sort of playfulness of expectations that Douglas
I like the fact that that conversation that ends with sort of like it's the logic of humanity or whatever says, well, if that logic, basically says if this thing does it, then you cannot exist. And God's response was and then to pop out of existence, and then sort of it's really
mad.
Yeah.
Well, and then not to gild the lily, but then it even adds on to that. The Babelfish has been so wonderful and allowed so much communication that it's been responsible for more wars and deaths than any. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Again, another subversion of expectations. That extra communication, instead of bringing people closer, has made people more hostile and kill each other more.
Well, I like the fact that comes up again. That comes up a couple of times, and there's a joke later on when Arthur says something. And just so happens but him saying that just happens to fall through a wormhole in time and drift across the table of two sort of like warring factions, or about to, and it happens to be an insult in one of them and results in a war.
That's in the movie too. It's the one during the credit sequence.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's halfway through the credit sequence.
Oh, okay. Because it turns out, then they're so small they get eaten by a dog. And again, you sort of it's invading force and so I love those pokes. What I would say is though, those first two episodes, it's so sort of clear to me from listening to little bits of the radio play, the film and this. And I haven't read all the books. It's been a long time since I've read the first. I've read the first three, but it's been a while since I've read them. I do go read all of them at some point, but Douglas Adams' ideas are so strong in that first book, and especially in that first part of the book, that's what everyone's able to cling on to. It's like, oh, it's so clear this bit. That's what we can do, and we will replicate that. And then beyond that, it's like it's a series of ideas and events, but they don't always hang together in the best possible way. And we don't get beyond, so the Hollywood version has to have the happy ending of the Earth being recreated. Yeah. This doesn't have that, and I like the fact it doesn't. But it also has it at the end of episode 4. They just zap out of existence and go to the
end of the universe.
The restaurant at the end of the universe. I think, and how they got there and why is barely ever addressed.
No, I mean. So really, what's interesting to me is that those first 4 episodes are the movie, right? That's the first book. And it doesn't, obviously, a very different ending than the movie. I mean, but what's interesting is it's about the same runtime. Yeah. Even at the beginning of episode 3, you introduce Magrathea and the custom planets, which is much earlier, halfway through. And I kind of like that, I mean, especially compared to the movie. But then, then as you say, it kind of by the end of 4, we're clearly in different territory, and we have the sort of cops blasting them, and that cop stuff goes on a long time. Yeah. And it's making fun of cops, and their propensity for violence, but it doesn't work. It's not firing on all cylinders like those first.
That's a good example, though, of one of the scenes exactly. But maybe the book doesn't do it. But like that scene of and I feel the same. Actually, there are 2 bits. I think this is similar. There are scenes like this that are overlong, like the cops going like, we're not bad people. As they're shooting on them and all this other stuff, and yes, we do go for immense crazy violence, but then we agonize over it later and all this other stuff. Like I can imagine this working in a book. Mm-hmm. You can read this, and I can see this Pratchett doing something similar. Like it would be funny. It's the same with the philosophers that confront deep thought that's completely sort of taken out of the film. But, when they have the 2 scientists sort of like creating and asking deep thought, the big question, they then get confronted by 2 representatives of the union of thinkers. And again, this feels like a very sort of Pratchett and Adams-esque idea where you're like, okay, I get this. And then it goes on a bit and it goes on a bit more. And then it sort of comes to this end conclusion of them being told by Deep Thought, well, you know, if you've got the idea, that's just you could then sort of market this idea and do this and this. And the punchline is basically, well, why didn't we think of that? And stuff. And it's like, you took a bit too long to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it wasn't that funny, you know. The timing, by that point, the timing's off. I agree with you. And then also, you know, I mean, it's worth saying that, like, there are elements that I like about it, but that whole Megrathea set design is, while they've tried to make it expansive and they've tried to make it kind of look like a temple, you know, and they've got like a fog machine going, you really are feeling the budget much more in a way that, and which is funny because in the movie, that's a part that we've highlighted as looking cheap, you know? Although you have the, you know, millions of years later, the crowds, you know, that adds so much. And I think there are moments like that where, as much as the two of us love British television and we love low budget stuff, there are moments like this where you can feel what a big budget allows you to do in a good way, you know.
The flexibility it gives you for some storytelling points, or world building, I would say. I agree with that.
So I agree with you that like that the cops, there's an explosion. So basically, like, the object that's like a computer that they're hiding behind glows and explodes. The next episode starts with them in the restaurant at the end of the universe. And there is it's obviously at the end of the universe, right? The universe chronologically is ending. Whereas the joke in the movie is on a corner physically. But it is supposed to be at the chronological end of the universe. But in order to just, like, they've skipped through the book. So there's stuff they skipped over. And they just say, oh, well, I guess that explosion of that computer sent us forward in time. And you're right, they just bypass it. They just ignore it. And it's really annoying. It's the first kind of like real jump where it kind of jumps the shark.
It's the same sort of thing as, we talk about Red Dwarf, but it's like the end of season 6 into season 7 of Red Dwarf, where like Starbug's destroyed, and in the next one you have like Lister going like, here's this thing, and Crichton's just like, nobody cares, it doesn't make sense, move on. And they sort of make a joke of it in Red Dwarf, and you go, okay, I'm happy to sort of, let's just move on, it is what it is. But here it just it feels awkward, like, oh, we've got to get to the next destination. And then they sort of rush through the next 2 episodes, feel so insanely rushed. It's just kind of confusing, to be honest.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, they do feel rushed, and it does feel like that transition then becomes the key thing, right? Like, just get us to the next bit. But none of those bits really make sense or are entertaining. I mean, I always think of the Alan Moore 2000 AD story about the the loudest band in the cosmos, that is clearly ripped off of this. But both this and that don't work for me, because I think like the entire point of I hate most live concerts, but part of the point of them is that you see the band. If you're phoning it in, then it doesn't make sense. And it's like this spaceship is going to fly, and I know that's supposed to be like the pyrotechnics of a Kiss show or something. Okay, fine, but are you able to see that from the planet's surface? Like, I mean, that's like a little dot. Like, what, none of this ever really worked for me. I mean, it's a kind of clever idea that doesn't fire, that doesn't hit. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah, but this is those ideas that I think of when I read certain books, and this is the idea. If you read this in a book where it's like, the best way to listen to a disaster area concert is 37 miles away and inside a concrete bunker, and then you get to visualize them doing that. Pyrotechnics is them diving a ship into the sun. It sounds so extreme that when you're reading it, you go, oh, that's silly and funny, and it's sort of like, and you move on to whatever, because it's the Hitchhiker's Guide explaining that stuff. However, when you've got to present that visually, all of a sudden you come across these problems where you're like, that's not as much of an issue as it wouldn't work because like it would just evaporate and there wouldn't be anything there, or it'd just be destroyed before it gets the sun. Like it very much sort of like it's you can articulate these in a book and it can be a joke and you move on, but the moment you've got to sort of present that as a visual, that's the thing, it starts to fall apart a little bit.
Well, and then there's the ship where it's all the people who they wanted to get rid of, so, and that's a very Red Dwarf idea. Like,
yeah, I love that, by the way. I love that idea. I'm unfortunate. I think that my job would be, I think I'd be on there somewhere where I'm going like, well, I've got as a project manager, I'd be like, when they have the management consultant, I'm like, yeah, I'm not far behind him. I'm writing up a Microsoft plan of how this ship is going to be taken off, and there's a whole bunch of us talking about requirements, and yeah. So I do love that, that the idea of that ship.
Yeah, I mean, although it's okay, but they do have the problem of like then the entire planet died because of unsanitary telephones.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's charming that the planet died, right, with the having gotten rid of the people they thought were unessential. But it does seem like, well, wait a minute, somebody should have, like, there are roles fulfilled on the B ship that you would think you need these to be fulfilled, right? I mean, like, you need somebody to sanitize stuff, right? I mean, wouldn't that be the C ship? But it's a good joke. I mean, it's a clever joke. I'm nitpicking, but I do like the idea of just, we're going to ship them away. Don't worry, we're following you in the next colony ship.
I like the fact it's the B ship. In fact, I think I like it more because it's the B ship, because it's sort of like a class thing where it's like, we have the people at the top who own everything and produce all the capital. And then in the C class, we have all the people that actually, the working class, that actually do the doing, actually produce things. And then there's all these middle managers in the middle, and there's like a person from marketing, there's a person that the management consult, hairdressers, which I do think is a little harsh. Like I'm follically challenged, let's say, but I do think that you can't not have a hairdresser.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I do like it as a joke, and I kind of like, again, one of the things that we've talked about is before, if a bad joke's done badly by a bad actor, like, it falls apart. But like, I kind of like the guy who plays the captain in his bathtub and all that kind of stuff. He's not endlessly funny, but he's kind of charming. So parts of it are working for me because I'm like, oh no, this has actually been performed in a fun way. So that part, some of that does work for me.
I also find myself wondering, like, there's in my headcanon of this bit, it's like, it's partially their occupations, it's also that they're gits, right? It's also that they're like, they're dislikable people, they're useless, annoying, dislikable people, and that's very clear that that's the case. But I think we're supposed to think that people in those occupations are also happen to be dislikable, which is a little harsh. But the version that I like is sort of, they're predominantly in these, but they're in these occupations, but they're also just the people we voted off the island.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And as I've joked, I think potentially I would be on that ship, but I'm happy with the joke. I think, again, it's this. You say it's harsh, and we've come across this before. Sometimes I'm like, but British humour. This is the Blackadderyness. This is that Red Dwarf. Then there is that edge to it, that nastiness that we are quite used to. That I do think in some cases you do see it, and people go, "Oh, that's really mean," and we're like, "No, we don't mean it like that. It's just the sarcasm of it all." The one problem I have with this end bit, as you say, is Zaphod and Trillian just disappear. All right, because there's this teleportation thing. But before we get to that, I want to address something that actually, watching it this time, really bothered me.
Yeah.
When they escape the restaurant, they get on the ship. Marvin's helped them out. Marvin has waited for multiple billions of years to find them, or at least
millions of years,
millions and millions of years, right? Eons he's waited for them.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds them, and he's still sort of like, oh, it's okay, everything's terrible, whatever. And it's again, I find him a little bit overplayed in this, but it should be like, there's not one of them is like, oh my God, like he's waited on this planet for millions of years to re-find us. Like he could have gone off and done anything. Like he's not programmed to do that. He's done it, and then they sacrifice him to save themselves.
Casually. Nobody expresses a single line of remorse or like, hold on a minute. Like I'd be like, let's just push Zaphod, like who's just a cipher, like, come on, you've got the brain the size of the universe, maybe we should save him.
But yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, there's no voting. There's nothing. I don't know. Honestly, I can't remember what it's like in the book, but it just feels like so callous and so sort of like not even funny that actually it really bothered me this time. That I was almost like, and it made me think of, it made me sort of think of like Crichton and how you say like Crichton became a character, and I can imagine Crichton offering. In fact, I'm sure he has. I could probably, if I thought about it, come up with an episode where Crichton has offered to sacrifice himself. In fact, he does. If I think of like the Inquisitor episode from season 5, like he'll sacrifice himself, and the others will sort of, well, apart from Rimmer, maybe will step in and try and sort of like go, no, you're part of the crew. Like there's none of that here, where there's like that camaraderie. Like they don't feel like they don't coalesce in the same way. But it really bothered me when they sacrificed Marvin in that way.
No, it bothered me too, and it didn't bother me as much in the past. I certainly noticed it, but yeah, I did find myself bothered by that. I do, but I think in my case, like I think that the show knows that they're basically unlikable characters, right? I think you're supposed to be bothered to some degree. But the problem is twofold. I mean, first, while they're unlikable characters, they haven't been developed. And so, it's one thing to have an unlikable character like Zaphod in the movie. It's another thing to have a unlikable character who's also a cardboard cutout. And so that's one problem. The second is, like, you talked about the waiting for them so long. Obviously it's many orders of magnitude worse, but I find myself now thinking of like Rory in Doctor Who.
That's exactly what I thought of. Yeah.
Or like episodes where like Superman in a comic like goes to some hell dimension for 2,000 years and comes back. And it's like, no, that's going to change your mentality, right? People don't stay the same. And I could see like you could do that and have and have the robot be super upgraded and have a different mentality and be like, hey guys, I waited for you, I'm not as depressed anymore, or it's turned into a deeper kind of thing, I mean, you could do this and have it be really funny, and it's such an occasion for stuff, but I refuse to ever accept any of these sci-fi things where somebody waits for hundreds or thousands of years, let alone millions of years, and just is the same at the end of it. Like he's known them for less than 1%, a tiny fraction of 1% of the time he's been alive, and the story doesn't know that, right? And that's what I think is unforgivable.
Exactly. And then it's sort of, and then he's gone, and then they are teleported from the disaster area ship, and in materializing, they then obviously they land on this ship B, as you sort of with these people. And Trillian and Trillian and Zaphod are gone,
and nobody says where are they.
And I was like, gonna say,
we need to find
addressed.
Them. No. That and that teleport is so similar to the transport in time, onto the restaurant at the end of the universe, that at this point it's pretty clear the show is just like, all right, get to the next setting.
Well, and this is the thing. This is because it gets to the, I want to call it the Planet of the Apes twist at the end, because then I am like, oh, you left and because there's so much time given to the physics of the restaurant at the end of the universe. How that time loop, you return back to your own era and all this other stuff. Like they keep going, they bang on about it like several times to really harp home. Once you leave here, you return back to your own era. And I'm like, okay, cool, fine, I get that, because otherwise there's no story to tell. So they have gone back in time once they've left on the disaster area ship, but it never really sort of seems to address anything, because they're being driven into a sun, and you go, cool. The universe has just ended. So there should not be any stars. They're all going out. So at what point did you go back in time? You've never actually mentioned how that's worked. That's glossed over. So that's glossed over. Yeah. But the guide has tried to explain it several times, as has the host at the restaurant. So then they escape that and they got this ship. But they appear to have gone back even further, because then you find out that the planet they land on is Earth in a Battlestar Galactica kind of spoilers.
Well, end of the revival show.
Yeah. But I like
yes.
the joke. I like the joke that comes out of it is that these ship B idiots are actually the ones that have populated the Earth and sort of stuff. And so the program's buggered. Like the program to get the answer to 42 is actually broken. Like there's been like a contamination. I like that, but it's so rushed.
Yeah,
it just sort of it's like, oh Christ, yeah, they go away for a year. They travel for a year to go look for what's his face, Slarty Bartfast's signature on the fjords of Norway.
Yeah,
which is a nice little joke, but
yeah, I mean, but none of that works. And
no.
You know, I think it's a clever joke about the middle managers becoming humanity.
Yeah.
You know, but the way it's shot is my problem. So, you know, you're right about the logic of going back in time doesn't really make sense. You know, and again, I like the predicament too, you know, of like our heroes are stranded, you know, with no technology before, except they don't want to be, unlike Battlestar Galactica, you know, but the way it's shot is the problem. So you don't ever see the colony ship is about to crash land. You don't see it crash land. You just see them on the surface. It's clear, like, yeah, we're just phoning it in at this point. We're out of money. It's the last episode. You know, I mean, you could have done that. If Doctor Who can do that, you know, I mean, do it from space so you barely see anything, right? I mean, it's easy to do something. They don't bother. Then they're on the planet, and then, you know, Arthur and Ford set off on a makeshift raft off a coast, and then it cuts to 1 year and a little more later, and you see them arriving at the same coast again. You're like, where did they go? Why is it the exact same coast? How did they navigate? Like, what? I mean, am I supposed to think that's the same coast, or am I supposed to think that's just a generic?
How did they survive? How did they survive at sea? Yeah.
Were they adrift at sea for a year? That's what I thought the first time. I was just like, have they been? Is this another island? I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. And then they talk about like what we saw, what we found. Should we tell them what we found? We haven't seen what they found. We followed them. They're supposed to be our audience identification. Certainly Arthur is, to such a point that these other two characters, well, three including Marvin, are not characterized at all. Are literally just thrown away by the narrative. And then suddenly, I mean, it's so decentralizing for us to not see the crash landing, to have this weird shot, to then have information kept from us about our identification figures experience, that those are the problems for me. That I'm just totally taken out of that narrative, and I just don't think it works.
Well, I agree 100%. Like, it's just so, it's like, oh, I've missed a whole part of the story. Like, you know, I've missed I've missed the saga. Like, you know, we've just watched these other side characters bicker, and I get that could be a kind of a joke, but like, it doesn't work. But yeah, it just feels at this point like it does feel like so rushed and so throwaway that, like, okay, we've got to get to this point. But then when you do get to the point at the end, and you talk to and Ford speaks with the marketing woman, and he basically explains. He said, "We've seen that you find out that they've seen Slatty Bartfast's signature. They now understand that the program is working because you see a caveman doing Scrabble and he can spell 42, but they're going to be polluted because of these other people." And then when Ford confronts the woman, he's like, "Think about you have 2 million years. That's it."
Mm.
And the department goes, "Right."
But I'll be dead in 20 of those. You know?
So I don't see what the problem is. Like, I'm going like, okay. Right. And then they just walk off, and I'm watching the very end of this episode, and watching it this time, I was thinking, this is 6 episodes in. Was this supposed to have a sequel? Was there supposed to be a continuation? I don't know. Like, they obviously the books and that continue the idea into 5 stories, but like it almost feels. I
looked this up.
Yeah,
and apparently, I mean, I agree. It feels like it just ends, right? It doesn't feel like it comes to a conclusion. There isn't even like a final speech that's just kind of like, well, I guess we're stuck here for good, Ford. Like, they just walk away. Yeah, and there's that weird thing with like him doing the Scrabble and getting the math wrong, which isn't funny. It's more confusing than funny at that point,
Oh
because...
I actually had this question myself because they say it, and it was like they do the thing. I was like, that doesn't equal 42, and I had to sort of double check myself.
I did too, right? And it's like, no, the math is wrong. The program screwed up. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole like it's in Arthur's brain thing that doesn't make sense anyway. And then I also have the question of like, they've established that they're like extraterrestrials who like to just buzz neighborhoods, right? Okay, so if the computer that somehow, I like the idea that there's a computer that somehow involves organic life, right? It's never explained how that works in either version, right? But it's been a long time since I read the book. But, okay, if we're supposed to think that this ship crash landing contaminates that experiment, how come those people buzzing our planet? How come Ford himself didn't contaminate that experiment? In other words, it was always already contaminated the second an alien arrived. Yeah. If it's that fragile, what about a meteor impact?
Yeah.
Didn't, a meteor impact contaminate? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. But to answer your question, they did want to do a series 2, and Douglas Adams who was still working on Doctor Who at the time, and he had a rejected Doctor Who story that he wanted to adapt and turn into a series 2, and then it fell apart, and he had fights with the BBC over money, as everybody does, and so he transformed that rejected Doctor Who story, that turned into a rejected series 2 into the 3rd book of the Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
Yes, because he wrote, I think you can actually get that original sort of version of it. I think it's called Sharda, or he did obviously the Doug Adams version of this and stuff. But yeah,
I think it was a different story, but
I haven't read it.
They've done Sharda as, I mean, you and I are very familiar with Sharda.
Yeah. The one thing, you're right. This whole sort of end just sort of comes, it happens, and then sort of like I was a bit like, oh, okay, I'd forgotten it ended in this way. And I like the sort of, again, this sort of, we've talked about time travel and the inevitability of like, okay, well, this is why that saving the world, destroying the world 5 minutes before the program was going to output its conclusion is irrelevant because it was all corrupted at the very beginning and so on and so forth. So I liked some of that. Yeah, but the way it works, it feels like the last 2 episodes of themselves should be the next series. And so it's bizarre that how rushed it feels. It feels very compressed. Just a couple of final points that I do want to, because the thing is, the last 2 episodes in particular are where I think the first 2 episodes are really strong, and I really like them as episodes, and I could probably watch them. I would repeatedly watch those. the last 2 episodes, although they don't work, have good moments in. Like there's still good stuff in there. As I said, I like the whole Plan B stuff, like joggers go past, but they go for a jog and then back into their cryo tubes and all these. There's some jokes around that are really good. One of the bits I like the most, which you know, you are a vegetarian, and I'm not.
Oh yeah.
Is when they get to meet the dish of the day, and it's they bring out. Weirdly though, didn't know this. I was just checking to complete the Doctor Who connection. That dish of the day is played by Peter Davison, future Doctor Who.
Yeah.
So there you go. But I do like I say, when it comes out, and there's this notion of an animal that is wants you to eat it. And obviously Zaphod's kind of cool with it, and it's like, hey, yeah, well, yeah, it wants us to eat it. I want steak, so everybody's happy. And it's Arthur that is sort of like, no, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to eat this. But then he's confronted with his hypocrisy, and I like that. I like that scene as well. That makes me chuckle, and I think it's a well done dig at the hypocrisy of meat eaters. So I am, you know, I'm quite happy to have them someone go show that to me and be like, you know, here is your hypocrisy, and I'm like, yeah, no, 100%, like I agree with it. So there are good bits like that.
I do think that's good too. I have always liked that. And I'm glad you're open to that hypocrisy. I will say, as a vegan, that it also makes fun of vegetarians, and it's true.
No one's after vegetables.
He says like, well, you know, I'm just gonna have a salad, and he says, oh, you know, you didn't get those vegetables, you know, vegetables get said, you know, and he says like, you know, that's not what the vegetables say, and then he's got some like psionic link to the vegetables, and the vegetables are going screaming no, you know, and there are times, well, obviously it's ethically different, but there are times where I think like, yeah, I mean, if I'm in some kind of weird cosmos where like every piece of broccoli has a soul, you know, and like an animal has a soul, maybe a cow is like a more advanced life form and feels the pain differently, but like you're eating a part of a cow, and I just killed like 20 broccoli.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it though. I think it's good, especially when sort of like they're talking about which rump he wants to. But what makes it, what tops it all off, is when they do come back to them and they are eating, and actually their head is on the table, and I was like, wow, they're really going for it with this. So there are little bits as well, and I like the fact that when they go through, when the host is going through the people that have attended the end of the universe, and you get like the Norse gods and sort of stuff, and then there's a group of religious people that are waiting for the return of someone, and he's like, I've got long left, lads, you've really got 5 minutes, kind of thing, like that. I think some of that makes me laugh. That's all good as well. And then that I think that's clever, but then that deity does return.
Yes. And then I think like, does he return every time they run through this? I mean, you say they spent time on the physics, and that's true, but the physics don't make any sense to me.
No,
you know,
no, because they've also got a buffet at the beginning of the universe as well. Another thing where you can go have breakfast.
The Big Bang burgers.
Yes, yes. So again, there's great jokes in this, and it doesn't. It's just unfortunate. I think the presentation is failing. What this tells me, though, is having gone through this and the film, one of the things that we said is this needs a modern, redo. And seeing this as a TV show more than ever, more than when we watched the film, but more than anything now, I am very much in the line of this needs a Prime, Hulu, HBO Max, someone, give this to Neil Gaiman, who, obviously wrote the first companion book to, it's one of the first things he actually did as a writing journalist. Right. Give it to Neil Gaiman. He will steward this in, do a great job. This needs to be revisited as a TV show with a bigger budget. And I think, there's no definitive version of this yet.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. I mean, I think I love the show, and I think you have underlined for me how much those first 2 episodes are different from the last 2.
Yeah.
I definitely feel that drop off, but sort of like the first 2 are super strong. The middle 2 are sort of okay, strong, and those last two are like, you're phoning it in,
Yeah.
still have moments, as you say. I think we're on the same page. And I think you've highlighted for me how severe that step down is.
Mm.
But having said that, I still love the show, and I sort of, it's very dear to my heart. But I have to admit, I like the movie version better.
Mm.
And then that makes me feel like very American, like, because it's like, yeah, I like the shiny thing. I like the big budget. I am charmed by this show, but I do like the shiny thing. I do think there are ways in which it's hard to beat that, especially with Zaphod on a new TV show. But I think you're right. The TV is the way to do it, because ultimately this is episodic, and you want to be able to have room for taking your time in one sequence or another, and also for those hitchhiker segments. And it's interesting to me that they're here. It looks like my Apple IIe, right? It's designed to imitate, like those. I had the motion comics on my old Apple IIe in the 80s, and that's what it reminds me of. But then, like obviously the movie is like Flash animation in style, and that's interesting to me. But it seems to me like you probably had to fight for every hitchhiker sequence in a movie. When you're talking about a 2-hour movie devoting 3 minutes to an unrelated animated sequence, is very ambitious. And if it's TV, that's got to be an easier sell. So I think you're right. You got to do a TV series, and
I think the thing is that you could
the whole series.
I think so. Yeah, you've got 5 seasons there. You can pace it out a lot better. You can do a bit more with it. You say about the film is a great standout, and I think like we said, like Sam Rockwell and I think the cast in that are all very, very strong. I do think there's a different way of doing it. I think lean into the whole thing. Like you have Sam Rockwell, who he said has that sort of like, he's a versatile actor. Like he can do different things. He has the element of like almost like creepiness that we've said. Like he's part of. I'd say get someone, keep it a bit more British if you really wanted to do that, and go have someone like Russell Brand do it. The comedian stuff, or then the Australian comedian Tim Minchin has got that sort of like look. I think is a bit weird and a bit sort of unique, but like is incredibly charismatic and funny. Have that. I think Russell Brand would be the kind of thing. He's a bit weird these days, but like he'd be a good way to go. But you're right. I think you could definitely do it in that way, and expand those kinds of things. And I think I don't know what you do for the book now, because I think again the only problem is I think Stephen Fry is almost like the definitive voice of the book. He it's funny how like he actually does the audio book as well for this, so it's a bit like, oh nuts, like you've already got him, you've already done it, but I'm sure there's someone that could do it.
Well, you could also use the recordings that he made, because you've got plenty of those recordings.
Well, he's still alive. We could read, if you want to expand them. But because why read it? We have to maybe buy them. But there's ways to do it. But you gain someone else. There's other people I think you could do things. But again, it's I think as we've seen, like you mentioned when we we mentioned the film, Good Omens, I think is a fantastic example of how you could take something and do this. And I just think that we haven't had the definitive version of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on screen yet, and I think there's an opportunity that is being missed. So
yeah, I agree, and it's it's such a like we said on the main show and talking about it, that it's such a definitive sci-fi property, even if it's the one that is comedic. It's right up there with Dune and everything else. As an important show. So, and
I want a running gag to be in it. Like we said, we had the original Marvin appeared in the movie in the queue. What I want is, if they do a TV show, I want the original Marvin and the movie Marvin in the queue. So every time they do a version of this, they have to keep having a new version of the Marvins in the background. But you could do so much. You could have the amount of gags you could do for different sort of British sci-fi. Like, have it when you go on. There's a blue phone box sticking out of a corner somewhere, or on a screen. mention the Jupiter Mining Core, or have an image of Starbuck,
Mhm.
those, and mention that, okay, this has influenced all these things.
Yeah.
We've got to recognize that sort of thing. I think it'd be quite interesting. In fact, Chris Barry would actually be perfect for the book. There you go. They got Chris Barry Rimmer would be fantastic
Mm.
to actually voice the Hitchhiker's Guide. That's my casting. Anyway, any final thoughts before we go wrap up on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
No, I think it's a joy to watch this and talk about it with you. It's a series that ever since discovering it and being like, wait, are you kidding? This is something that exists, and then really falling in love with it, especially those first episodes.
Mm.
There are so many gags that work well, and those hitchhiker segments always work.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a few that drag here or there or whatever, but it's amazing that they work here and they work in the movie. And here they have a little more time with the wonderful bit about the why are humans so unhappy, and the woman figures it out. Unfortunately, this was a few seconds before the earth exploded. Just the sort of like laughing cosmic irony of Douglas Adams' universe is so utterly charming to me.
Well, it's almost, I do love that moment where she's in a little cafe. It's sort of like it comes to her, and then that's like 2 minutes before the end of the universe or the end of the Earth. You said about the sort of the cosmic insignificance of Earth is played up on this. It's almost like comedic Lovecraftianism. Like, there's a comedic Lovecraftianism to this, where it's like, oh, you think you're the center of the universe. Oh no, there's a complete indifference to your existence, but actually, it's not intergalactic or interdimensional gods and crazy beings. It's just bureaucracy, and it is what it is. So I do kind of love that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been another sort of stories out of time and space nights, if you want to call it that. And there will be some more. We've got some Transformers coming up on the main feed, and we should be doing a little bit of Transformers on the bonus feed as well. So for now, thank you so much for your support. Let us know what you think, and we should be back on the next episode.